Would you believe that a black man, just because he was sitting in his car in front of his house, would have a gun pointed at his head by a police officer? Ethan Drake, 47 years old. A former military intelligence officer with 3 decades of service to the United States. But on a peaceful afternoon in Nashville, all it took was one look from a white police officer to turn him into a threat. No reason, no arrest warrant, just a gun, handcuffs, and a racist tantrum. It seemed like a momentary mistake. But no. It was the opening shot of a chain of persecution, lies, and organized violence that would turn Ethan and his entire family into hell. But you know what's scariest? They picked the wrong person to corner. If you believe that justice has no color, like this video, if you've ever seen the truth distorted, comment below. And if you believe that light needs to be spread, subscribe now, because this story is just beginning. That morning, Major General Ethan Drake was headed straight to Fort Campbell. He wasn't wearing a uniform, no medals, no badges of authority pinned to his shoulders. Just a 47-year-old black man, driving a sleek black SUV, wearing a blue shirt and khakis, preparing to train a crop of young officers in honor, tactics, and loyalty. He had led battalions through Mogadishu, waded through Central American jungles, and survived ambushes in Fallujah. He had been in and out of the Pentagon with high-level clearance, shaking hands with the men who had the power to decide wars. But that morning, Ethan was a lone driver, in a small Tennessee town he'd passed dozens of times, on a stretch of Highway 64 under the June sun, a quiet countryside, or so it seemed. His GPS was starting to malfunction. The screen flickered as if it were being jammed by an update. Not wanting to get lost, he pulled into an old gas station on the side of the road, a battered red brick with a faintly blinking fuel sign. He parked next to the rusty pump, popped the hood to check the oil as he had done as a private, then took out his encrypted military phone to reset the navigation. And then a strange sound, the slow rolling of tires on gravel. A police car appeared in the distance, with no siren or lights. Slowly, but deliberately. The dust behind it was as thick as battle smoke. The Lee County Sheriff's Office logo was faintly visible on the left door. Ethan straightened, his eyes fixed on the cruiser. His command instincts spoke quietly in his head. Stay calm. Don't move. The car door opened. A man got out. Much younger than Ethan, in his early 30s. Fair skin, hair cut so close it reflected the sunlight. A loose uniform with a badge pinned askew on his chest. Carver. His left hand was in his pocket, his right resting loosely on his holster. He didn't slow. Didn't say hello. Didn't look around. He just walked straight ahead. His eyes were fixed on Ethan under the cheap sunglasses, as if he'd caught someone stealing a car. "Good afternoon, officer," Ethan said, his voice even, his hands at his sides. Carver didn't reply. He stopped a meter away from Ethan, the smell of stale coffee rising from his breath. Then, like a slap without using his hands, he asked, "What are you doing here, boy?" That word. The word Ethan's ancestors had been called for generations. A word that held all the contempt, the arbitrary power. It didn't need to be shouted, didn't need to be explained. It just needed to be said. Ethan took a breath. "I just stopped to fix the GPS. The system's down," he answered, his voice calm, pointing at the phone. Carver squinted into the car. "Where are you going?" "Fort Campbell," Ethan said. "Just reorient yourself and I'll keep going." "Get out of the car." "I'm already out of the car," Ethan said softly, tilting his head toward the SUV. Carver took a step back, unlatching his holster. "Put your hands on the trunk. Hurry." Ethan frowned, but did as he was told. The humiliation was starting to seep into his bones, being ordered around by a cop who had never seen combat, being dismissed as a drug dealer simply because he had brown skin and a nice car. "You fit the description," Carver said. "What description?" Ethan asked, his eyes never leaving the trunk. Carver didn't answer. He just kicked Ethan's legs apart, forcing him into a straddle position like a criminal caught in the act. Then his hands roamed over him, folding the folds of his shirt, pressing down on the muscles Ethan had trained for over 30 years. No warning, no reason, no respect. Inside the gas station, a white attendant laughed. It was like someone enjoying a free circus act. Ethan heard it. Smoldering, guttural laugh stung his heart harder than Carver's first blow. "Turn around, hands behind you." Ethan turned, slowly. His face was a mask of eerie calm. Carver slid the cuffs on, the metal clicking loudly in the quiet summer afternoon. "Suspicious presence," he muttered. "Must be up to something." Ethan stood there, his hands locked behind his back, his shirt wrinkled, his wrists burning. He was no longer a senior officer, no longer a father, no longer a husband. He was a black man handcuffed in a dusty gas station, and all he had was silence and crushed dignity. No apology, no legal questions. Not a single witness dared intervene. And so, a 3-star major general in the United States Army, who had fought for his country in foreign lands, was humiliated in his own country. Not because of his actions, but because of the color of his skin. You are watching the first part of a video series about a war not on the battlefield, but right in the heart of America, where a soldier's honor was trampled by prejudice and hatred. Comment number 1. If you believe that a general should not be treated like a criminal just because of the color of his skin. Click like if you support truth and justice. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next part will reveal the one phone call that could have changed the fate of Major General Ethan Drake. And you won't believe what happened next. The police car rolled away from the gas station, leaving Ethan Drake behind, handcuffed and strapped to the back like a petty thief. The heat of the vinyl seats burned through his sweat-soaked clothes. The smell of burning plastic mixed with the lifeless cold of the air conditioning blowing directly at his face. He didn't ask any questions. And the cop, Carver, didn't say another word. There was only the sound of flashing lights, the red and blue light blurring through the glass, and the steady heartbeat of a man who had faced death. But never this humiliation. Ethan had lived long enough to know the truth wasn't always heard. But he never thought he'd be the voiceless victim. A 3-star general who could call the Pentagon directly is now unable to defend himself against a young, power-hungry local cop. When the car pulled up in front of the Lee County Sheriff's Office, a squat building with worn brown brick walls, Ethan looked up at the sign as if it were the first time he'd ever seen it. In the harsh sunlight, the 3 words "Justice for All" on the flagpole looked like a sarcastic joke. The door opened, and he was pulled out. Another officer, white-haired and wrinkly, stepped out to assist. He glanced at Ethan, and then quietly asked Carver, "Who is this guy?" Carver shrugged. "I don't know, but he's in a nice car, dressed too neatly, and has no apparent reason to be here. Do you have any papers?" "Not yet. Wait until we get to the interrogation room." They didn't ask Ethan's name. They didn't ask why they'd stopped. They didn't ask if he wanted a lawyer. What they saw was just an unfamiliar black man, judged by his eyes rather than his mind. When Ethan was taken inside, he had to walk down a long hallway lined with photos of retired officers, all white. An older man mopping the floor looked at him, paused for a second, then looked down again, avoiding his gaze. Disorientation set in, not because he didn't know which way was the exit, but because he no longer believed the right way was. Ethan was led into an interrogation room where fluorescent lights cast a chilling light on a cold metal table. His handcuffs were removed, but instead he was watched by a camera mounted on the ceiling. Carver closed the door behind him, leaving Ethan in a closed space, a place where time seemed to stop, and all wounds began to bleed. He looked around. On the table was a thin file. It could have been someone else's. It could have been his. Or it could have been for no reason. Some people didn't need to be wronged to be punished. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. No one came in. No sound. No news. Ethan's mind was spinning with memories. The general's ceremony with his son standing by the flag. The applause of his comrades in the command room when he was awarded the Silver Star. The smile of his mother, who had been refused service in a restaurant because of her skin color, but had taught her son that this America is yours, too, if you work hard. The words sounded so far-fetched now. The door swung open. Another officer, Wade, entered. He didn't look at Ethan as he pulled out a chair and sat down. "Mr. Drake, or should I say, what? I don't see my driver's license," Ethan said, his voice low. "I have my driver's license. In my wallet, in my shirt pocket." Wade pulled out his wallet and flipped through it. "Oh, Major General Ethan Drake," he emphasized each word, his eyes narrowing. "What a coincidence." Ethan remained silent. Wade leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on the table. "You're not wearing a uniform. Your car has a special license plate but no military insignia on the outside. The GPS is malfunctioning, and you're stopping at a gas station in the same area where a suspected car thief was reported. You think we should believe it?" Ethan tilted his head. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I just want to be treated according to the law." Wade laughed. "Law? We call it intuition here." That, to Ethan, was like a knife cutting the last thread that bound him to his belief in fairness. Over the years of service, he had always believed that the system could be fixed, no matter how flawed. But today, right in the middle of a county police station, he realized, when the law is replaced by biased intuition, every black man can become a suspect. Wade stood up with no conclusion and no record. "We're verifying your identity. In the meantime, don't move from your chair. And Drake, if you're really a general, you should get used to being questioned, right?" The door slammed shut. Ethan was alone again. In a cold room, in an America that once called him a hero, and now holds him like a nameless ghost. This part shows the mental decline of a man who once put all his faith in his country, now defeated by those who wear the symbol of justice. Comment number 2. If you feel Ethan Drake's disappointment and feel this shouldn't happen to anyone, click like to support those who once served justice but were turned away by justice itself. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 3, where a single phone call can change everything. Because sometimes, a voice at the right time is all we need to keep from falling. A faint light finally shone in the darkness of Ethan Drake's life, or so he thought. That was when the phone rang in the police station. It wasn't loud, but in the cold silence of the cell, it rang like a church bell at dawn. Wade stepped in, holding the cordless phone, his eyes suddenly lacking the usual contempt. "Someone wants to talk to you," he said. Ethan took it. His heart pounded as a familiar voice came on the other end. Sharp, decisive, unmistakable. "Ethan, this is General Carl Jefferson from the Pentagon. I've just received the report. We know everything. And we're not leaving you alone." Ethan almost held his breath. "Thank you, General. I really needed this." "Listen carefully. We've sent you the paperwork confirming your rank and identity. Someone will be here to pick you up within 30 minutes. But Ethan, there's something I need you to know." His voice dropped. "The person who arrested you, Carver, is no stranger to the system. He was investigated for his involvement with an internal right-wing group. We suspect this arrest was not random." Ethan's hope turned to chill for a moment. He was silent. "That is, I was targeted from the start? I can't say for sure, but be careful. This could be the tip of a larger plot. You need to stay calm until we get there." The call ended. Ethan put the phone down on the table, his hands clenched. Wade returned, accompanied by a junior officer carrying a file. He threw it down on the table, his eyes glancing at Ethan with a mixture of confusion and displeasure. "Your certificate has arrived," he said dryly. "We are processing your release." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's it? No apology, no report, no investigation of the wrongdoer?" Wade was silent, his eyes were averted. Ethan stood up, slowly walking closer, his eyes never leaving Wade. His voice was low and bitter. "I am a major general in the United States Army, and you handcuffed me like a car thief because of the color of my skin. You didn't verify, you didn't give notice, you didn't give a reason, you just took one look and judged my character." Wade chuckled, about to walk away, but Ethan spoke louder, as if to etch it into his heart. "You should be afraid, not because I'm a general, but because the truth is coming." 10 minutes later, a black military SUV stopped in front of the police station. 2 uniformed officers stepped down, their faces solemn. One pulled out a phone and called directly into the reception room. "We're here to pick up Major General Ethan Drake. Orders from the Pentagon." At that moment, like a chain reaction, reporters began to arrive. The news leaked out. Someone had said it. Maybe an employee, maybe a civilian who witnessed yesterday's arrest at the gas station. But now the world knew. As Ethan stepped out of the headquarters door, he was greeted by both sunlight and flashing camera lights. "Are you Major General Ethan Drake? Was your arrest racially discriminatory? Are you going to sue the city police force?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He just stood there, in the storm of microphones and cameras, then turned to the two escorting officers. "Give me 2 minutes." He stepped up a small step, facing the dozens of cameras trained on him. His voice was steady, unwavering. "I served this country for 29 years. I stood in the middle of the battlefield to protect what we call freedom, justice, and human dignity." He paused, his eyes scanning the reporters. "But yesterday, I was handcuffed by a man in an American uniform for no reason. I was treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. I was kept in the dark, isolated, and silent." Ethan clenched his fists. "If even a high-ranking officer like me is not respected, how much more humiliated are ordinary people?" A hush fell over the entire sidewalk. "This is no longer my story," Ethan continued. "This is a test of the system we believe in. And I promise you, I will not be silent. Not this time. Not again." He turned and walked back to the car. The door closed. But the truth, and the anger, was still echoing outside. However, as the car started moving, Ethan received a text message from the military dispatcher. The text was simple, but it chilled his heart. "Carver and his team are missing from their post. Internal surveillance reports no original arrest records. Some of the videotapes have been erased. Someone is covering this up." The hope that had just been sparked was now crushed by someone who sat higher than Wade or Carver. Ethan leaned back in his seat, eyes half closed. He knew the game had only just begun. The car carrying Major General Ethan Drake drove away from the media storm, into the quiet of the concrete jungle and the shadow of power. No sirens, no fanfare, just the soft crunch of tires on asphalt, as if all were trying to hide the fact that a man who had been handcuffed for no reason was now entering a silent war. The building ahead bore no signs, no guards, just a metal door in the wall that opened when the car stopped. "You go in first," the officer nodded. "We'll keep watch outside." Inside was a small room separated by bulletproof glass and a triple security system. The lights were dim, and there were no flags or badges. And no one to greet him. There was only a single laptop, turned on. Ethan stepped closer. The screen displayed the Pentagon Insider logo. A text message popped up. "Welcome back, General. Are you ready?" Ethan closed his eyes for a second, then typed, "I never left." A nameless spider web. Ethan's story was no longer a simple case of false arrest. It was a window into a layered, anonymous network of faces within a seemingly perfect system. After his release, Ethan quietly contacted 3 people. Not many, but all ghosts in the military. The man who had hacked into the CIA database. The man who had exposed a senator who had colluded with an extremist organization, and a hacker who had been locked up in the government's cybersecurity system for 6 years because he knew too much. Their names were not on any list, but Ethan remembered each one, because they had helped him expose an internal rebellion abroad. Today, they're back, to expose the very thing that's eating America's insides, the insidious subtlety of systemic racism. The first clue, a hidden code. The first to speak was Casey Stitch Ralston, a cybersecurity genius who lives anonymously in a basement near Seattle. "Ethan, I've pulled up the data from the gas station camera where you were arrested," Stitch said over an encrypted connection. Strange thing, the data from that day wasn't deleted like the police said. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Wait, not deleted?" "Right. Just hidden, with an ancient code. The kind was only trained on a very small group of insiders." He sent the file. Ethan opened it. And there, sure enough, was the image of Carver and his men holding him at gunpoint, handcuffing him without explanation, then whispering something that wasn't in the report. Stitch paused, his voice dropping. Carver's line. I cranked it up, filtered out the noise. He said, "A black rat poured gas in a white neighborhood, huh?" Ethan stood still, his hands clenched into fists. Not from pain, but from the cold, programmed insult in every word. The second link. A silent officer. The second clue came from an unlikely source, Lieutenant Camille Yates, who had been listed as a nothing witness in her arrest record. But Ethan knew her. She had been his cadet on a training mission 4 years ago. The one Ethan had defended against a dismissal for inappropriate behavior. In fact, because she had dared to protest an officer who had insulted an Asian American comrade. Ethan sent her a single message. "Justice saved you. Now it's your time to save it." 5 minutes later, Camille sent a recording. Her voice was shaky but clear. "I heard them talking before the general arrived. They knew you would be there. Someone called ahead. I didn't dare say, because Lieutenant Carver approved my promotion." Ethan knew she was taking a risk, but he also knew it was people like Camille who had been forced to kneel by the system, who were now starting to stand up. Rebirth. Not by guns, but by truth. For years, Ethan had lived amid explosions between the lines of life and death. But he had never felt a battle as quiet and fierce as this one. Because this time it wasn't trenches. It wasn't bullets flying. It was a wall of sweet words hiding corruption. It was laughing eyes in the corridors of power. It was nods and pats on the back to silence a voice. And Ethan chose not to scream. He chose to record, document, connect, file it. Line by line, name by name, date by date. "We have to hit them where they think we can't," he told the team. "Not with anger, but with what they can't stand. Transparency. Silent resistance is the fuel for the fire." As the sun set, Ethan sat alone in the conference room, the light from his screen reflecting off his deep eyes. No anger, no pain, just the terrifying clarity of someone who knew how the world worked and had nothing left to lose. He opened the file titled, "Exposed, Carver and the Systemic Discrimination Network," and he typed the first line. "I don't write for revenge. I write because if I stay silent, who will speak for those who are no longer alive to tell the story?" No news story said it. No one admitted it publicly. But in the darkness of cold, soundproof rooms, where nods and glances spoke for nothing, the commotion had begun. A leaked video, a viral recording, a seemingly innocuous testimony. But placed in the right context, at the right time, it had the destructive power of dynamite. They called it the reverse domino effect. Not from below, from above, falling. The silence before the collapse. In a small office in the Pentagon, Lieutenant General Ronald Whitmore sat silently before an urgent report with the headline, "The Ethan Drake Profile Risk Analysis." A single line sent a chill down his spine. If Major General Drake continues to receive support from human rights groups and mid-level insiders, political support for the stabilization of the forces operation will be withdrawn within 3 weeks. He set the file down on the table and looked out the glass door at the new recruits marching. In his mind's eye, he saw Ethan, the man he had believed had been suppressed after the gas station incident. It turned out he wasn't silent. He was just waiting. When powerful hands begin to withdraw. In Congress, a closed-door meeting was held with no cameras, no reporters, just the heavyweights, a senator, a campaign donor, 2 former generals, and a member of the Security Council. "Drake has evidence," the senator said quietly. "Internal audio, original video, testimony from Lieutenant Camille Yates, and the mission log from Fort Greystone." One sighed. "If he releases it now, we won't have time to deal with the fallout before the election." "No, he won't," the last person at the table said. "He wants us to unplug ourselves and slide." A look passed between them. No words were needed. They knew Ethan wasn't doing it to win. He was doing it to expose the truth. And that was more dangerous than any counterattack. Ethan didn't need to speak up. Fear speaks for him. Ethan didn't hold a press conference. He didn't talk to the press. He didn't write a blog post or make a video pleading for justice. Instead, he sent a short, specially encrypted email to 12 human rights organizations, 20 investigative reporters, and 8 retired military lawyers. The only headline, "If I'm forced to disappear." There were no accusations inside, no threats. Just an absolutely detailed dossier with dates, locations, witnesses, recordings, voice analysis, and the legitimate testimony of some of the previously silenced figures. Each line was cold and careful, as if it had been written months in advance, specifically for this moment. The once ignored, suddenly silent. A few senators began to change their tune. A few national television channels suddenly questioned the military's handling of the situation at the gas station. Even the Pentagon spokesman used the phrase, "We are reviewing the entire internal investigation process." What was happening? No one dared to say it out loud, but everyone understood. They weren't afraid of Ethan. They were afraid of themselves, afraid of the decisions they had signed. Fear of the recordings they didn't know were being recorded. Fear of what Ethan would do if they continued to choose silence. The shock from within, at Fort Greystone, the base where Ethan had been commandant, mid-level officers began to whisper. "I heard he didn't send any threatening letters. No, it's just the file circulated. Like everyone knew, everyone needed to see." A colonel, who had refused to sign the controversial report, was called back to Washington to support internal hearings. 3 days later, he was promoted. No announcement. Everyone understood. When one person stood up at the right time, the whole system would adjust. Not out of morality, but out of fear. Fear packaged with care. Not hasty fear. Not screaming panic. It's a quiet kind of fear, where those who once held power knew they didn't have enough time to put out the fire. From the Pentagon to Congress, from the press corps to the headquarters of international organizations, Ethan Drake's name began to be mentioned not as a victim, but as an undercurrent, a warning, a lesson, something that shouldn't happen again. No one wants to be asked. Amid the storm, how many more cases like this have been hushed up? How many witnesses have been silenced? Is our military built on honesty, or on the fear that people like Ethan will destroy it? These questions rang out in courtrooms, in the hallways of Congress, and even in conversations between husbands and wives. Are you sure you're going to sign that bill? Are you sure you're going to let your kids join the force? It wasn't the press that put pressure on him. It wasn't the protests that scared him. It was his own conscience that began to question him. Ethan, the man who didn't have to show up, still made others withdraw. That night, Ethan stood in a small room, looking at a data board containing 63 other cases that showed signs of cover-ups. Internal. Each case had one thing in common. The victim was a person of color. Each case was not thoroughly investigated. He was not angry. He was not hurt. He just said quietly, "I don't need to win. I just need to let the truth live long enough to speak for itself." Ethan Drake sat against the cold wall of his federal cell, the fluorescent light overhead pouring down on his bloodied, exhausted face. Everything from the SWAT blows to his wife, Lena, still echoed in his ears. His wrists were still zip-tied, his eyes were swollen shut from needless punches, and his chest burned with every breath from the unhealed rib wound. But what kept him awake wasn't the physical pain, but the look in Lena's eyes. Panic, helplessness, and pain as she watched her husband being beaten and dragged away like a despicable criminal. He'd been through many fronts, from the burning sands of Kandahar to the jungles of Africa, led his men through breathtaking ambushes, but he'd never felt so alone as he did now, in his own country, under the very laws he'd sworn to protect. All because of one man, Sheriff Dale Hargrove, and a vicious hatred dressed in the cloak of justice. While Ethan was in custody, Lena didn't sleep. She paced the living room, where the floor was still littered with glass from the previous brick attack. She called Greg Tate, their attorney. Desperately, her voice breaking as she told him about the arrest, about Ethan being beaten right in front of her eyes. Greg sprang into action, calling Captain Daniel Rhee, the military forensic officer who had cleared Ethan of previous charges. This time, they didn't have time. Everything was being twisted into lies faster than Ethan could clear his name. Captain Rhee wasted no time. He accompanied Greg to court, bringing with him crucial evidence, video from the security cameras Ethan had installed around the house after the attack. The video clearly captured the SWAT raid. Ethan unresisting, unarmed, and brutally beaten without even knowing why. Meanwhile, another clip shows Lena being pushed to the ground while trying to stop her husband from being arrested. The federal police at the time did not issue an official arrest warrant, only repeating a meaningless name. On suspicion of assaulting an officer, Rhee and Tate marched straight into the judge's office, laid the evidence on the table, and asked for all charges to be dropped immediately. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of former soldiers gathered. They carried flags, signs reading "Justice for Ethan" and "A general, not a criminal." The media crowded in, cameras following their every move. The atmosphere was heavy with anger, but also burning with hope. Finally, under too much pressure, the judge had no choice but to speak up. Lack of evidence. All charges against Mr. Ethan Drake are dismissed. The gavel rang out like a belated atonement bell. The door opened, and Ethan walked out of the cell. His face was bruised, his shirt was torn at the shoulders, but his back was straight, his steps as steady as when he commanded hundreds of men amid bombs and bullets. Lena ran to him, wrapped her arms around him tightly, crying and laughing at the same time. She whispered, "You're back. We still have each other." Ethan hugged his wife, feeling her heart pounding against his chest as if to remind him that this wasn't the end. Greg patted him hard on the shoulder, and Rhee gave him a military salute. "You're still a general, even if they try to make you forget it." Ethan nodded, his lip quivering, but not from pain. It was a mixture of pent-up emotions, anger, injustice, but also gratitude to be alive and to be loved. They left the courthouse soon after. The live stream of Ethan walking out of his cell was trending on social media. The hashtag #HardStandWithEthan was everywhere. Veterans, people Ethan had saved, even ordinary citizens who had never known him, all stood by him. That evening, a small gathering was held in Nashville's Central Park. Ethan stood before hundreds of people, his face still swollen, but his eyes brighter than ever. He took the microphone, his voice hoarse, but each word like red-hot steel. "I fought for this country, but I never thought after all these years that the enemy I would face would be lies and hatred disguised as the law. I don't fight just for myself. I fight for those who have no voice." The applause was like waves, spreading throughout the park. Lena stood beside him, her small hand tightly holding his. Aisha, their daughter, watched from the live stream in the dormitory, tears streaming down her face as she saw her father standing tall in the storm. Ethan thought he had won a real victory. But in the remote cabin on the Lee County border, Dale Hargrove was watching the live stream with bloodshot eyes. He wasn't finished. There was no way a guy like Ethan would stand before the public as a hero without paying the price. And Hargrove called Clyde, a bomb maker with cold hands and a criminal record as long as the highway. "Give him something no one else can save," Hargrove said quietly over the phone. "His daughter's school. Tomorrow morning." As Ethan and Lena left the park, hand in hand, neither of them knew that a bomb had been set off. Not by tripwire or explosives, but by unsettled hatred. The handcuffs slid off Ethan Drake's wrists with a loud click, echoing through the cheers outside the courthouse. The crowd filled the aisles, holding up signs, "Justice for Ethan." The applause was unceasing, mingling with the cheers that washed over the people. But Ethan stood still, his eyes still fixed on the courtroom door that had just closed behind him. There was no triumph on his face, only the calm, the look of a man who had just gone through hell. Lena, his wife, rushed over and hugged him until she couldn't breathe. She burst into tears, not from sadness, but from relief. "You're back," she said through her tears. "You're back with us." Behind them, attorney Greg Tate stood still, his face weary but his eyes still sharp. He was the one who pierced the fabric that Sheriff Dalton Harrow had created. Every piece of fake evidence, every edited video, every mismatched fingerprint, all were exposed by Tate and his legal team in court. But this victory did not come from him alone. It was also thanks to a clip from a security camera that Ethan had secretly installed before his arrest. The video captured the entire scene of him rescuing Lena from an abandoned factory controlled by a group of thugs, not an act of violence, but an act of saving a life without waiting for orders. Social media exploded. Free Ethan Drake became the top keyword. Veterans spoke out in unison. Those who had opposed him now changed their tune, sharing posts and organizing rallies in support. On the way back, Ethan's car drove slowly between two rows of people holding candles, standing on the side of the road, a scene never seen before in Nashville. But Ethan's relief was fleeting, quickly replaced by a deep-seated worry. He knew Harrow wasn't done yet. A man like him, disgraced in public, unmasked by the very man he had once tried to turn into a criminal, would never let it go. That night, Ethan sat on the sofa in the living room, the lights off, save for the faint glow of the patio lamp filtering through the curtains. Lena sat next to him, her hand clasped tightly, while Aisha, his daughter, was in the rec room. She was still shaken by the explosion at the university, but at least she was safe now. "Can you sleep?" Lena asked, her voice soft as if afraid to disturb the rare moment of peace. Ethan shook his head. "I can't, Lena. I feel free, but not truly free. Harrow is still out there. And he won't stop, will he?" she continued, as if reading her husband's mind. Ethan nodded slightly. "No, he won't. But this time, you're not alone." He was right. Emails from old military comrades began pouring into his inbox. A lieutenant colonel at the Pentagon, who had fought with Ethan in Kandahar, invited him to speak at a national security conference. A group of veterans in Georgia set up a legal fund to support him if he was ever unjustly prosecuted again. People everywhere sent well wishes, cards thanking him for standing up, for daring to fight against wrongdoing. The next day, Ethan, Lena, and Aisha returned to the hospital for a checkup. He had not fully recovered from the SWAT beating, a fractured rib, deep bruises on his back and wrists. But when Ethan saw the doctor come out of the X-ray room, he knew the news would not stop there. "We have to report that the trauma from the last attack has left a nerve injury in the lumbar region," the doctor said hesitantly. "Mr. Drake, you will not be able to walk normally. You may need to use a wheelchair for a long time, possibly permanently." In that moment, Lena put her hand to her mouth. Aisha burst into tears. And Ethan? He just closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Then he opened them again. No anger, no panic, just the steely gaze of a man who had survived many battles. "I still have my arms," he said. "I still have my heart. I still have my voice, and I have my family. Harrow may have taken my legs, but he could not break my spirit." That statement later became the headline of a viral article. "He can sit, but he doesn't bow." That evening, Ethan sat in his backyard, his hands on the arms of his wheelchair. Lena made him a cup of ginger tea while Aisha was winding the string lights around the porch to lighten the mood. "Are you scared?" Lena asked, sitting down next to him. "Yes. But being scared doesn't mean you should stop," Ethan replied. "If you don't stand up for yourself, who will stand up for the weak?" Lena smiled, squeezing his hand tightly. "Then we will stand together." And in the quiet of the night, no one knew that 40 miles away, Sheriff Harrow was sitting in an old cabin, playing the latest news over and over again. Ethan Drake exonerated. Support spreads. He threw a beer bottle against the wall. The sound, the glass shattered as if it were a hiss of pent-up rage. He hadn't lost. No, Harrow hadn't accepted defeat. And Ethan knew. This fight wasn't over yet. The night wind whistled through Ethan's window, a reminder that the peace was temporary. 3 days had passed since his release. 3 short days, but every second felt like lead. The news of Ethan Drake's exoneration was all over social media, newspapers, and television, but the faint signs of a new storm were beginning to appear. On Wednesday morning, while Ethan was helping his daughter Aisha edit her papers for a school essay, there was a loud knock on the door. Lena ran to open it and was startled to see a federal agent standing there, in plain clothes, his face as cold as steel. "Mr. Drake, I'm Special Agent Marcus Hill, Homeland Security. We have urgent information you need to know." Ethan nodded, inviting him inside. Lena looked at her husband anxiously, but Ethan had expected it. This peace would not last. "I'll get straight to the point," Hill said, opening his laptop and clicking on a video. The screen showed a hidden camera in a bar 80 miles outside Nashville. A man in a police uniform was talking to a group of strangers, handing them a file. "Who is this guy?" Ethan asked, his eyes narrowing. "Deputy Raymond Kruger, on the Rapid Response Team, and former right-hand man to Sheriff Harrow," Hill replied. "According to the information gathered, Harrow is forming a cleanup team to restore his honor, and his #1 target is you." Ethan was silent. Not angry, not afraid, just thoughtful, like someone calculating his every move. "It doesn't stop there," Hill continued. "We suspect Harrow has accessed classified military data about your service in Afghanistan. He's looking for any weaknesses, and we found someone posting fake documents to an extremist blog, accusing you of war crimes." Lena froze. Are they making things up again?" Ethan let out a small breath. "They'll use everything they can get. Honor, career, memories, even the people who died defending this country." Hill nodded. "We need you to be prepared. This is no longer personal. It's an information war. If you fall this time, many others will be silenced." Ethan looked at Lena. Then Aisha, who was studying in the living room. He knew he could no longer keep his head down. And so he nodded. "I'll face it. But this time I won't react. I'll be proactive." That night, the Drakes' living room was transformed into an emergency center. Ethan's attorney, Greg Tate, and 3 paralegals set up a data analysis station. Hill brought in a team of cybersecurity technicians, installing software to track keywords targeting Ethan. A digital map on a large screen showed hundreds of social media accounts being manipulated to spread rumors. A viral blog titled "Ethan Drake, Hero or Killer." It contained doctored images, inflammatory messages, and audio clips from old meetings. Words like war, civilian, and abuse of power were highlighted and repeated with alarming frequency. "This is a tactic of public psychology. They're trying to create artificial anger," said one of the experts on the team. Ethan stood up, placing his hands on the table. "They thought I was going to hide in the shadows again, but I'm going to step into the light and let everyone see the whole truth." Greg nodded. "Then we'll have a press conference, a face-to-face confrontation, but we'll have to prepare very well." 3 days later, in a Nashville arena, more than 300 reporters from across the state were there. Ethan's supporters packed the field, holding signs and some wearing shirts that read, "No one can bury the truth." When Ethan Drake, in a dark blue suit, sitting in a wheelchair, appeared on stage, the room fell silent. Not a whisper, just the flash of cameras. He looked up. Clear. Steady. "I was framed. I was arrested in front of my daughter. I was beaten, imprisoned, and smeared. But what hurt me the most was not the physical. It was the distortion of justice by those in power." His voice was steely, each word falling like a verdict. Behind him, a large screen showed never-before-seen footage taken from the nose of the camera strapped to his chest when he was arrested. It showed Deputy Kruger stomping on him, shouting, "This guy doesn't need the law, he just needs to learn to be afraid." A buzz rose like a tidal wave. A few reporters jumped to their feet, scribbling furiously. The next screen showed a flowchart, from Harrow's campaign fund to the anonymous accounts that funded extremist sites. Ethan looked straight into the camera. "I'm not saying this because I want to restore my reputation. I'm saying this so that others, those who have no voice, no power, know they're not alone. I will be the shield. I will be the resistance." As Ethan left the hall, the crowd outside erupted. People spilled out into the streets like a living wave. Tears, hugs, hands reaching out to touch him. Lena cried as she watched dozens of veterans stand at attention in the crowd. But in a black SUV parked nearby, a figure was watching it all. Sheriff Harrow. His hands were gripping the steering wheel, his eyes glued to the live stream on his phone. He was no longer calm. He was like a wounded animal, about to attack in desperation. Ethan had spoken, but the coming battle would be more than just words. The Nashville sky at dawn was still dotted with ashes from the previous night's fire. Ethan Drake's red brick house was now a blackened canvas of smoke, a legacy of vengeance in the form of hatred. The garage was burned out, and the remains of the SUV that had served him for years lay desolate under a layer of ash. Ashes fell silently from his graying hair, whispering from fate that this war was not over. But Ethan was no longer a man on the run. He was a father, a husband, a general who refused to bow to the threat of darkness. And that morning, as the first light shone through the scorched windows, he took the hand of Lena, the woman who had been with him since the beginning, and whispered, "We're not afraid anymore. We're going to end it all." He didn't wait. Ethan called Colonel Tara Vaughn at the Pentagon, his voice not trembling, not pleading. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what needed to happen. "Tara, last night's explosion was Hargrave's final blow. He's not stopping. It's time for us to not just react, but attack." Vaughn didn't ask much. She just said, "I'm going to cast the net." A federal sting operation involving the FBI, military police, and a special unit of the Department of Defense was activated. Within 6 hours, the home of Shane Carver, the deputy who had handcuffed Ethan with a sneer, was surrounded. Carver's laptop, phone, and dash cam were seized. Among the evidence were a doctored video that blamed Ethan, a file of images extracted from a hacked traffic camera, and a series of text messages between Carver and Sheriff Hargrave. "He's on the rise. I'm going to take him down." Ethan received a copy of the entire file from Vaughn. He didn't smile. Instead, he remained silent, reading each message as if he were giving a eulogy for a corrupt justice system. That afternoon, when the agents entered Sheriff Hargrave's office, he was sipping bourbon, flipping through an old notebook with the names he had processed over the past 20 years. He didn't flinch as he was handcuffed. He still had that contemptuous smile. "You think you won? That old man is alive. I'm in power." But he was wrong. As Hargrave was led out, the cameras were waiting. The news broke nationwide. Tennessee sheriff arrested for attempted murder, destruction of evidence, and domestic terrorism. Millions of people who had been following Ethan Drake's case since the video went viral exploded on social media with tweets, comments, and live streams of support. Lena sat next to Ethan in the living room, which had been a battlefield just a week earlier, and tears rolled down her cheeks as she watched the news. But Ethan wasn't done yet. "I want him in court," he told Vaughn. "Not just arrested. I want him to be seen by the whole country in the dock, where justice will not turn." And so it began. Hargrave's trial was set. Ethan Drake, still confined to a wheelchair because of his injuries, appeared before the national cameras in a specially modified military vest. His shoulders didn't slump. His head didn't drop. His eyes were bright, full of fire. As he wheeled past the reporters, he was a living and flesh and blood monument to resilience. On the first day of the trial, the prosecutor presented all the evidence. The original unedited video, the clip of Hargrave hiring a bomber to blow up his daughter's school, the recording of the threatening call to Lena, and the confession of the henchman Ricky, who was arrested in the abandoned factory. But the moment that took everyone's breath away was when Ethan was called to the witness stand. He recounted, without a tear, every wound, every sleepless night, every SWAT kick on his home turf, every brick through his window, every bloodstain on Aisha's pillow. I served this country for 32 years, and I was not beaten by war. It was by a badge in the wrong hands. The courtroom fell silent. His voice trembled slightly at the end, but that was what made his words sink into the hearts of those who heard them. Everyone saw in his eyes, not hatred, but the pain of a man who had put his trust in the system. The day the trial ended, the jury took only 15 minutes to return its verdict. Guilty of Dale Hargrave, guilty on all counts. The sight of him slumped, head bowed, being led away amid the boos and tears of those he had oppressed, went viral. Ethan didn't go to the prison to see him off. He just sat in his wheelchair on the porch, Lena's hand clasped in his, and stared silently at the horizon. "That's it," Lena whispered. "No, it's just a turn," Ethan replied. "We're just beginning to understand what the truth costs." The rehabilitation room at Walter Reed Hospital was bathed in the pale light of early morning. The smell of antiseptic, mixed with the rhythmic sound of the ventilator, was the constant melody of each passing day. Ethan Drake sat in a wheelchair, his eyes no longer as gloomy as they had been in the first days, but instead a cold gaze of a man who had hit rock bottom and was slowly crawling up from there. His hands clenched the horizontal bars in front of him. Sweat soaked his back, even though the air conditioner was running smoothly. The physical therapy assistant nodded. "When you're ready." Ethan didn't answer. He took a deep breath, counting silently in his head. 1, 2, 3. Using all his strength, Ethan tensed up, pulling his paralyzed body from the waist down to stand up straight, his legs hanging limply, but his back still trying to hold on. He trembled, his teeth clenched, his eyes blurred, but he still stood. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then he sat down in the wheelchair again, panting. The room was silent. "You've held on longer than yesterday." The assistant smiled. Ethan nodded, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were bright. In the early days, when the doctor told him he would never walk again, Ethan was silent, not arguing or refusing. But in his heart, he could not accept it. How could a man who had crossed the deserts of the Middle East and crossed the deadly terrain of Somalia lose to a bullet from a cowardly policeman? No, impossible. But Ethan also knew this was no longer a war of guns, but a war of wills. That night, in Nashville, in Ethan's small yard, the lights were bright. The press, neighbors, former teammates, and many people from all over had come. They had come not to see him off, but to witness a turning point. On a small stage set up in the middle of the lawn, Ethan Drake sat in the middle, his uniform hanging on the chair behind him. The bruises on his face had faded, but the scar on his chest was still smoldering. Aisha sat in the front row, holding her mother, Lena, in her arms. The two women were the pillars that kept Ethan from collapsing during his darkest days. A reporter raised his camera. The host signaled for the audience to quiet down. And then Ethan spoke up, his voice hoarse but resonant. "I thought my fight ended on the battlefield, but it turns out the real fight is in my own country, not against enemies with weapons, but against people who wear badges and use them to destroy honor, dignity, and even innocent lives." All eyes followed him. Ethan gripped the microphone tightly, continuing, "They beat me, tied me up, smeared me. They took my wife, threatened to kill my daughter, set up traps, spread fake news, and even detonated a bomb in my school. And finally, they shot me. A bullet in the chest paralyzed my legs. But you know what? I'm still here. I am still here." Applause broke out, but Ethan raised his hand, calling for silence. "I'm not saying this to get pity. I'm saying it so we all remember. Injustice doesn't die when we're silent. It just gets bigger. And if someone like me, who had everything, can still be trampled by the system, it can happen to anyone. But we're not going to bow down. Not today. Not ever. The crowd erupted. Many were in tears. Aisha ran up, holding her father's hand. Lena came up, putting her hand on his shoulder. And then Ethan nodded, pulling a file out of his pocket. Today I'm not just talking, I'm taking action. My attorneys and I have filed a federal lawsuit. Not just against Hargrove, but against the entire system that covered him up, silenced him, and colluded with him. The police, the prosecutors, and the people in the Pentagon who tried to scapegoat me. I'm going to hold each of them accountable. The stage erupted again. The voices rang out from all over. Justice for Ethan! No more silence! Fight back! That night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan sat alone in his office. Dozens of letters were on his desk, from veterans who had been abused, from families of framed victims, from black kids who had scrawled, "I want to be Uncle Ethan when I grow up." He read them one by one and cried, not because of the pain, but because he knew he wasn't fighting alone. This wasn't just his story. This was the rebellion of a generation that had been pushed into the shadows. The next morning, Ethan woke up and practiced. Even though his legs were still immobile, he still pulled his arms to lift himself up little by little. And then, one day soon, Ethan will stand up. Not because of medical advances, but because of the will of a person who does not give up. Final message to listeners. If you ever feel oppressed, deceived, or trampled by those in power, do not be silent. Remember Ethan Drake's story. He is proof that a single person, with love, courage, and justice, can still shake the corrupt system. Comment "I stand with Ethan" if you believe in justice, like if this story touches you. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next journeys, because there are many things Ethan hasn't told, and the fight is not over yet. You've just witnessed the entire story of Ethan Drake, a 47-year-old man with 32 years of public service, who has led dozens of operations to protect America's security, but who is being treated like trash because of the color of his skin. He didn't break any laws. He didn't threaten anyone. He just sat in his car in front of his house, waiting for his wife to bring him coffee. But to a prejudiced white supremacist cop, being black meant danger, a punch, a pair of handcuffs, a series of lies, and a system that was willing to silence him in every way, from black-helmeted SWATs to lies on national television. And when the legal system protects the oppressor over the victim, that's no longer a mistake. That's a crime. Do you feel angry? Do you feel hurt? Do you see yourself or someone you love as Ethan? Ethan's story is more than just a personal tragedy. It's a wake-up call for all of us, that in a society that calls itself free, justice can be bought, truth can be twisted, and a black man can be shot, arrested, and imprisoned, even when he's done everything right. But Ethan didn't fall. He rose from the blood, from the bricks, from the betrayal of the system he once served. And he fought not just for himself, but for all those who have been stifled by silence. This story is a lesson for all of us. Never think you're safe just because you're silent. Don't let others define your worth by the color of your skin, your address, or your profile. And when you see injustice, don't look away. If Ethan's story makes you angry, hit that like button now. If you have something to say to people like Ethan in real life, leave a comment. We read every line. And if you want to continue hearing the stories of truth, the hidden injustices, the people who have been pushed to the edge and then stood up, subscribe now. Because we don't tell stories to entertain. We tell stories to awaken. And you are part of this journey. Don't be silent. Don't forget. Ethan Drake is a name, but behind him is a generation. And if no one speaks up, they will continue to be erased from the truth. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next story. But don't forget, the fight isn't over.